I typically don't stick to the script. I go off script all the time. I tell stories, and a lot of times I'll tell stories about my kids. Only one of them's here tonight, so that's going to put a damper on that. So I won't be able to tell as many stories about kids. So a little short, I am going to tell you a story, real quick, because you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to hear these folks that are here to talk about what's happening at the Board of Regents. But this is relevant. So I started my career in Philadelphia. I was a teacher in Philadelphia. And I married a girl from Brooklyn. That's right. And if you marry a girl from Brooklyn and you live in Philadelphia, where do you move? To Brooklyn. So I moved to Brooklyn, and I was very, very fortunate to get a job teaching in New York City. I've been teaching in North Philly. For those of you that know Philadelphia, North Philly is a very, very challenging neighborhood. I loved the work, but I needed to make the change. So I made the change. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I will tell you, when I first got here, one of the things that perplexed me was the structures around the Board of Regents, and frankly, the exit criteria and the exit testing. And it didn't make much sense to me. Now it's made more sense to me over time, and I put my arms around it, and it's got its flaws, but it's also got its pros. And so I've worked my way through the system. I spent some time in District 2, where I was a teacher. Then I went upstate for a little while and out on Long Island for a little. Then I went back to the city, where I was what they call the local superintendent and a community superintendent on Staten Island. For those of you who, I don't want to date myself, but we had regions for a while. And that's where I really got a chance to work with a lot of the folks that are in this room tonight. And so when somebody said to me earlier, what's to say that this is going to be any different than every other time they talk about change? They talk about change and nothing substantive ever happens, or nothing that they think is valuable ever happens. And I said, I know these people personally. I've known them for years. They're not out there doing this because they're not serious about change. They are extremely serious about change. And what better time than now, right? When we absolutely need the support in our schools. We need to make adjustments to support our students. We need to make adjustments to support the new students coming into our system. And we need to set it up so that when they are finished with our system, they can do whatever it is that they want to accomplish when they're done. If they want to go to college, great. If they want to go into a career, great. If they want to go into the military, great. Whatever it is that they want to do, it's our job to prepare them for that, not try to shove everybody into the same hole. So I think what you're going to hear tonight, and I'm certainly not going to speak for Dr. Young, is exactly that, how they're managing and engaging in conversations around that. So I am going to do a couple of introductions, because that's my job. I'm the moderator tonight. And like I said, I'm going to try not to talk too much. This is where I'm going to read, because I don't want to miss anything about the folks that are here tonight, Dr. Young and our panelists, because I think it helps lend context. All right? So Dr. Young I certainly want to thank you very much, Dr. Young. When you reached out to me and asked me to do this, I was really, as you know, more than happy to accommodate, saying that we can get some new and aspiring administrators into the room so you can have this conversation. So I want to thank you for that opportunity. He's a distinguished leader in education with over 50 years of dedicated public service. As the Chancellor of the New York State Board of Regents, and I know sometimes that gets confusing. Well, you have the Chancellor of New York City Schools, and she's the superintendent, so to speak. Dr. Young is the president of the Board of Regents, if I could be so bold. He's the first African-American to hold this role in 237-year history of the Board of Regents. Indeed. He has pioneered numerous innovative programs. He's got a transformative leadership style, not a transactional style, and I've seen that firsthand because we served together as superintendents in New York City, including his instrumental work with New York State My Brother's Keeper. He's played a vital role on this Blue Ribbon Commission, which is transformative and not transactional, right? His vision and dedication continue to influence policies statewide, which is really astounding from my perspective. So Dr. Young is here. Also in the room, and they probably don't want me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Also with us tonight is the Vice Chancellor, so the Vice President, if you will, of the Board of Regents, Judith Chin. So as I've said this many times, and this is a little bit more of the story. So when I moved to Brooklyn in New York City, I needed to find a teaching job. And I was very fortunate to meet none other than Judith Chin, who hired me as a 6th grade teacher in District 2 in Chinatown. What I didn't know when she hired me was that it was a progressive school in so many different ways. And I don't mean just let's do this because it's progressive. It was really detailed and engaging, and it was outreach to the community and to the parents and to the teachers. She was interested in hearing everybody's voice. And that was not what I experienced when I was in Philadelphia, nor what I actually envisioned leadership to be. So to say that she has informed my leadership journey is an understatement. And she continues to inform my leadership journey. So Judy, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. Thank you very much. Also with us tonight, oh, by the way, she's the first Asian American to serve on the Board of Regents. So, and I'm also honored to have Miss Angelique Johnson-Dingle. So Angelique, she is here as well. She is the Deputy Commissioner for P-12 education in the state. And I was fortunate enough to work with her out on Long Island, where she was a district superintendent of Western Suffolk BOCES, and I was a superintendent of one of the school districts out there. And we worked together very closely on a number of projects. Here's yet another person that I have faith in that will do this and do this in the right manner. So I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. And you might say, why is that important? Aside from the fact that, again, it lends context. So what we did was we tried to put together a broad brush stroke of what it looks like in New York City for new and aspiring administrators. And that was what Dr. Young asked me to do, new and aspiring administrators. He didn't say who not to include. He said who he'd like to include. And often, you're not the ones called into a room. Often it's the senior. It's the people that have been here for many years. And not to say that those voices aren't pertinent and relevant and important, they are. But you will be the ones who were working in this system for decades to come. And he recognized that. So I want to certainly point that out. So I have Lenny Bruno. Lenny's right here to my right. He's an assistant principal at High School for the Arts and Technology in District 3 in Manhattan. He's also a planned pilot school. Lenny emphasizes the importance of forward-thinking initiatives and has a direct impact on students, families, and school communities. Lenny is a student in the Site St. Peter's doctoral program. So thank you, Lenny. Next to him is Denise Carabello, who serves as the Assistant Director of Multilingual Education in a very diverse district in Rockland County. This role involves supporting programs and initiatives that cater to English language learners, multilingual learners, and she works to ensure they achieve academic success and language proficiency. Denise is a graduate of our school leadership program and a current doctoral candidate in the St. Peter's program. So welcome, Denise. And then the other side of the room. So we have Deshaun Roebuck. He's a graduate of our Site Administration and Leadership program, currently serves as the assistant principal at the Bronx Community High School. It's a Bronx transfer school. He has a deep commitment and passion for supporting undercredited students that seek to meet graduation requirements. We have Trevon Adams. Trevon is a graduate of the Site Administration and Leadership program, currently serves as an assistant principal in Brooklyn, where his passion comes through in his work with typically underserved student populations. He has a deep interest in helping all students fulfill the requirements necessary to graduate and is an ardent advocate for the use of restorative justice practices. And we have Carmen Santiago. She's been a dedicated high school English teacher in the Bronx for the past 12 years. She's a doctoral candidate in the Site Russell Sage School Leadership Program. She's set to complete her studies next December. As an engaged, informal leader, Carmen has embraced servant leadership through her work on inquiry teams, school and instructional leadership teams, as well as her role in the English department, team leader, and she has served as a UFT chapter leader for her school. So thank you. I can't thank you folks enough. But not to be lost is all of you in the room. So a few housekeeping items, and then I'm going to turn it over to everybody else, and you're not going to have to listen to me anymore. So one, first, make sure that you sign in. Okay, you have to sign in. For those of you that will be using this for part of your internship, your seminars, CTLE credit, the only way that we'll know that is if you sign in on that sheet, so make sure you do that. There are also index cards on each of your tables. So as you go through the evening, if a question comes up, a follow-up question comes up, something along those lines, something doesn't get answered that you think is relevant, please write them down. Some of my staff will come around, collect them, and bring them up. And if time allows, I'll ask Dr. Young at the end to answer those questions. So without further conversation, I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Young before I ask for the first question from the panel. Dr. Young, is there anything that you'd like to say, or if you'd like to give an introduction into what you're thinking about for this evening? And I'll leave it to you. Absolutely.
Maybe I'll stand for at least part of it. And if I look in the audience and I see you're tired of looking at me, I'll sit. But no, seriously, I'd like to thank Dr. James for bringing us together. I'd also like to applaud each of you for adding this dimension to your professional repertoire. You know, if there was ever a moment in history where we need strong, committed leaders, it is the moment that we're in right now. And so I would applaud all of you, and no matter how tough it gets, either in your own pursuits of your certification or while you're in the role in school buildings working with our children, just remember that the outcome of that hard work is worth every bit of energy that you put into it. Our children need you. So thank you all for that. The other, just a couple of points, and I would ask that you indulge me for a moment. One of the things that, you know, I feel like I have a responsibility. You know, all of you are either leaders or aspiring leaders, and leadership is important, but not just any leadership, right? There are lots of leaders who lead with what I would describe, they lead without feeling. They lead without a sense of understanding who the students are that they're working with and how they learn. They lead without a real respect for the cultures and the cultural worth of the communities that they find themselves in. And so it is important that, at least I think it's important, that before I address the topic that I'm here to address, that you kind of get a sense of what motivates me and what's in my head, so that you'll understand better around why I do what I do, and why I think the graduation measures is so important. Now, before I do that, it's important to note that the Vice Chancellor and the Deputy Commissioner are here. But you need to understand the significance of their presence, right? Because the Vice Chancellor, very rarely do you get the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, and a Deputy Commissioner. And Angelique Johnson-Dingle is not just some Deputy Commissioner. She's the Deputy Commissioner for all P-12 education in New York State. That's important to know. She also holds the distinction of being the first African-American female to serve as a New York State BOCES superintendent. Why is that important? I can remember, and I'm dating myself, I actually worked for the State Ed Department. I'm perhaps one of the few individuals that worked at both the state level and the city level, and willing to talk about it. But seriously, there was a moment in recent history in New York. See, I remember when there were 42 BOCES superintendents, and this was in the late 80s, and I will tell you that there was no diversity at all. They were all middle-aged white men, right? And they were leading every BOCES district in the state of New York. And our deputy commissioner was the BOCES superintendent in, I think, in Suffolk. Western Suffolk. And what year was that?
2016
in
to 2022.
2016 to 2022. So just imagine, I remember what I said, she was the first to hold that title, and it was in 2016. But we were fortunate enough to recruit her. And the reason why she's here is that, she single-handedly, but all seriously, the deputy commissioner is the one who's spearheading this transformation initiative. So in addition to being responsible for all P-12 education, she's also responsible for the development and execution of the graduation measures and the planned pilot initiative, as well as everything else that falls under P-12. So, you know, it's important that you know she's here, and I would hope that there's a moment where you could get to meet her because she is a phenomenal educator that I think we will continue to hear from. So what is the context that I think is important? I touched on it a minute ago when I said we're in this moment. I actually think we're in a moral moment right now. And I say that because what we do in this moment is going to impact children, millions of children, right? Children that we will never get to know. So what we do in this moment is critically important. What we do, how we do it, but most importantly, whom we deem important in this moment, right? Because we, right now, because you may be asking, well, why did the Board of Regents and the Commissioner of Education decide to go on a transformation initiative in New York State? And here's the very simple answer. We have a system of some of the best schools on the planet. Literally, we have some of the best schools on the planet. However, they're not available to everyone. So that's number one. Number two, the system that we have, if you look at the data, has become a system of maintenance. Have things gotten better over the last 20 years? Absolutely. You know, the system of public education is very different than it was when I went to school. When I went to high school in New York City, you could get a general diploma, a commercial diploma, and an academic diploma. And it just so happened that most of the young people that were in the general diploma program looked like me. And so essentially, the system of public education, the system that was designed to help all children, the system that we tell children, just go to school and life will be better, is really a system of maintenance. It is a system that has essentially kept everyone where they are, right? And typically, well, what am I saying? I'm also saying that place matters, so that depending upon where you live, how much money your parents make, essentially determines the kind of education you receive. It determines the kind of opportunities that would be presented to you. So one of the motivating factors for us was really, how do we change that? That's number one. Number two, and I only have 10, so I'm going to be quick. In a lot of ways, this is an academic exercise. So, you know, hopefully I'm going to say something that'll resonate with you. So, the next thing that I think is critically important is that we spend lots of time talking about what is the purpose of our enterprise, right? So number two, the purpose of our enterprise is learning. We can't ever get confused about that, right? The purpose of schooling, the reason why children come to school, the reason why parents send their children to school is so that they will learn. Now, we can debate how you define learning, but we can never, ever debate the purpose of schooling, right? So it's very important that we understand that the purpose of schooling for all children is learning. And that learning, number 3, is a function of development. See, there are some people that have written articles and books, and they would like you to believe that learning causes development. The research says the complete opposite. Learning is a function of development, and that the developmental pathways, not just social and emotional, because I know all of you have read the articles and the books that say, oh, we have to do social and emotional development. Understand something. There are other developmental pathways, right? There's an emotional pathway, there's a psychological pathway, there's a health pathway. You see, in all of the developmental pathways, the linguistic pathway, they're all inextricably connected, meaning that they all work together at the same time. So let's think that through. So in our process of learning, we have to understand that when young people don't feel good about themselves, that's going to impact other developmental pathways, right? If you're not feeling good about who you are, if you don't know who you are and how you fit in, that's going to have an impact on your self-esteem, on your social interactions, on the amount of time you engage in self-directed learning activities. So the pathways, all of these pathways are inextricably connected, right? So in spite of the articles you may have read, and I'm not talking about any one article, what does the research say? The research says that all of the developmental pathways are connected. All of them. The next challenge for us is to improve teaching and learning for all students. That has to be a primary goal. And that leaders should work to remove the barriers that limit learning. And this is the most important part, that the leader has an obligation to build cultures in schools and communities where the school community understands its collective responsibility to ensure that all children learn. Right? And so what am I saying? I'm saying that within the school community, within the district community, the central focus for everyone in that community has to be to ensure that we're focused on children learning. Now, you may be saying to yourself, why is he telling us that? I want you to think about your schools, your districts, and think about what people are focused on. Right? How do they spend their time? And what's different about what they're doing and what I'm saying? Number 5, we have to ensure, we talk about standards, we talk about teaching practice and pedagogy, and we use all these words. But we also have to ensure as leaders that we maintain access to the differential opportunities, to the kinds of educational programs, resources, and opportunities that are needed to support learning. So what am I saying? I'm saying that not everyone is going to need the same thing at the same time. Right? And so we have to be flexible enough within the school instructional program to figure out how do we provide differential access to the kinds of learning opportunities that kids need. In other words, the one-size-fits-all approach is part of the maintenance problem. All right. One of my mentors said that all human behavior can be diminished, it can be made more complicated, and even more troublesome if we ignore what it takes to enable everyone to function well for themselves and in relation to others. So my mentor who said that was Dr. James Comer, right? Some of you may know who Jim Comer is. But what essentially he's saying is that if you don't take care of all the needs of young people, see, they're going to act in very predictable ways, right? If you don't attend to those developmental pathways that I talked about during the learning experience, they will act predictably, right? And some of you know what I'm talking about. How many high school people do we have here? All right, so we have some high school people. How many middle school? So, and I'm going to describe what I mean by predictable. Some of our youngsters are angry, apathetic, and absent. That's what I mean by predictable, right? And so if we're not attending to their needs, they will behave predictably. So when people came back from COVID and they say things like, well, these kids are off the hook, I don't know what happened to them. Well, what do you think happened? Right? Or sometimes I go into schools and people will say, well, you know, Dr. Young, they're just angry. I don't know why they're angry. And I'm saying to myself, have you looked around this building? Right? They've got good reason to be angry. But why am I saying this to you? See, you all are the next generation of leaders. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that, yes, New York State, the Board of Regents, we're going to talk about school transformation. However, transformation, think about it this way. Our institutions of learning should always be in a state of constant repair, right? You should never be satisfied with what you have. You should be always thinking about how can we make this better? How can we get more kids to this point? How can we include more kids in these opportunities, not just some kids? All right, I'll be quick. All right, the singular focus on high-stakes assessments and accountability practices as the only measures of school and student success has the power to undermine school transformation efforts, has the power to undermine and disproportionately impact negatively on poor students of diverse ethnic, cultural, and language backgrounds, right? Undermine disproportionately our most in need students. So when you focus only on one type of assessment as a measure of learning, you're actually hurting kids, right? This is not, by the way, I believe results matter. So I don't want anyone to go and say, we heard the chancellor say tests don't matter. Results matter. However, if you only rely on the one score to determine if learning is occurring, you're part of the problem. All right. So, in the 21st century, and it's interesting, you know, Allen Houston has this saying. He says, if you lean your ladder against the wrong wall, you will end up painting the wrong house. You know, some of you got it. We have to be very careful in schools. What are the things we're hanging our hats on, right? So skills are important. Skills get you in the door. But once you get in the door, there's some other things that you have to do, right? And you have to know how to interact with others, particularly others that you may not know, right? You have to know how to engage in a realistic self-appraisal, right? Why is that so important? How many high school students you say, well, what are you good at? And they'll tell you. I say, what are you not good at? 90% of them say, I'm not good at math. You say, why? I've never been good at math. I don't like math. But they don't know why. They can't really articulate for you why. And so the best learners are the ones who know how to engage in a realistic self-appraisal. I won't go too deeply into that. The final point that I think is important, and our deputy commissioner reminded me of this, and I hadn't thought about it in a while. It is when things happen, things don't go the way we had hoped they go. The question is, what did you learn from it? You have to ask yourself, what did we learn? So you may remember that in New York State, the Board of Regents had another grand idea, and it was called the Common Core. Right? Now, here's what we don't want to talk about. Originally, you have to ask yourself, the Common Core, does it make sense to have a common core curriculum for all young people? Does it make sense? Or let's do it differently. Is it all right for kids in East New York to learn one thing in the 4th grade math, and kids in Midtown Manhattan learn another thing in 4th grade math? Is that all right? So conceptually, the idea of a common core wasn't necessarily a bad idea. The problem was something called pace and scale. Doing too much, too soon, in too many places. So just remember that when you get this next grand idea for your school. Too much, too soon, in too many places is a recipe for disaster. That's what we learned with the Common Core. We tried to do too much. We went beyond the curriculum, beyond the standards. I mean, and we even got into something that just made no sense, right? We decided we were going to give teachers ratings based on score. I mean, we went through all of that. And look at where we are now. So people laugh when we say Common Core. So just remember, pace and scale. So having said that as the background, what our commissioner, Dr. Betty A. Rosa, did in 2019, she wrote this wonderful article where she challenged all the readers, and she said there's time for us to relook at the Regents exams. It is time. It's been around for hundreds of years, and we really need to look at it to determine if the information that we're getting from those exams are actually helping and promoting learning for all students. And I'll just very quickly tell you some of the things that we found out. We found out, for example, that for students who were just passing the exam, right, they had a passing score, that, in fact, Chancellor John King said last week that 56% of the students who graduate from New York State high schools that go to SUNY Community College, 56% have to take remedial courses. Think about that. 56%. That means 56% of the kids who pass the Regents, they get to community college and they have to take more high school courses. And they're paying tuition. He also said, which was also interesting, that 26% of the ones that are admitted to four-year colleges, so 26% just about a quarter of them, right, now have to take remedial courses. And here's the thing, the requirement to get it into a four-year institution at SUNY is greater than it is to get into community college. So these are students who are passing the Regents. And so here's what we have to look at. Then why are we hanging on to this as a measure, as a predictable measure of future success? And so the commissioner was just telling us what the data seemed to be saying, that end of course tests are not a bad idea. End of year examinations are not necessarily a bad idea. However, when they are the only measure and they are the determinant of your readiness for success at the next level, remember what I said earlier? It impacts the students of greatest need the most. And so it's time that we have to relook at what we're doing. The other thing that the commissioner and team did that I actually think was brilliant, because they learned something from the Common Core. See, one of the big problems with the Common Core, some of you may remember, people felt like, where are these recommendations coming from? Who made this up? Where did these ideas come from? And so what did we learn from it? We learned that we had to go through great pains to make sure that we're getting input. And Dr. James was just saying a little bit about why we're here. Why we're here, why I called him and said I wanted to do this, because you're not the only group that I'm talking to. See, I believe one of the leadership lessons that I've learned is that those closest to the problem tend to have the solutions. See, I believe that. I also believe that one of the things that I've learned is that all too often, when people get into the seat, the vice chancellor and the chancellor's seat, the challenge for us is that we often only talk to each other. And we have to figure out, now, how do we talk to people who are closest? So when the Board of Regents actually decides on the recommendations of the graduation measures, it will not be said that we didn't make an attempt to hear from people. So that's part of why I'm here tonight. I'm not here, I've been doing the talking, but I'm not here because I wanted to do another presentation. I'm actually here because I'm interested in what you have to say about some of the things that we're proposing. Now, I do know that in preparation for tonight, you've received links to our website, so I'm not going to go over what's there. I will say a couple of things more, and then I'll sit and we can get into the back and forth. The graduation measures under the leadership of our deputy commissioner, and I would add that our vice chancellor participated in every public forum that occurred, because it was important that the board have representation. And so as a result of the graduation measures, we have placed our bet on 4 transformation initiatives. 4. One, that we would move to 1 diploma. Right now we have 3. We feel it would be transformative if we move to 1 New York State diploma. Right? That's the first transformation, or that is one of the transformations. The next transformation is that we decouple the Regents exams as a graduation requirement. Now, I want to decouple. Why am I saying decouple? I'm saying that we're not suggesting, we're not doing away with the Regents. We are saying that the Regents exam will not be a requirement for graduation. That youngsters can still take the Regents exam if they like, right? We, as a state, we are not requiring it as a graduation measure. We also believe that, and it goes back to one of those 10 things that I enumerated, is that we have to have a system of multiple measures. In other words, we, in order to determine if learning is actually occurring, it should be based on multiple measures, not just one measure, multiple measures. We should look at, remember we talked about the developmental pathways and being inextricably connected. It's silly for us to say, well, you take this Regents exam on one day, but you don't look at what the kid did all year long in class. I mean, just think about it. There are young people in your classrooms, high school teachers, working hard every day, doing all the work, coming to class. They fail the Regents, they're out of luck. As my son told me, he said, SOL, Dad. I'm sorry, I had to. I had to. You don't ask what kind of conversations we had. So, we've placed our bet on these 4 transformational activities. And the last one, which I think is perhaps the most important, is the portrait of a graduate. Portrait of a graduate. The portrait of a graduate. Remember what I said earlier about a system of maintenance? See, one of the reasons why we were able to get away with the current system is because we've never said publicly that this is what we want for everyone, right? The portrait. What does the graduate look like, right? What are the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that every young person should have when they exit a New York State high school? We've never said that. And so that's why you have this kind of, it's this way over here and it's that way over there. What we're saying is that, no, we have to put an end to it, and it's important that we have a portrait. And so the deputy commissioner and her team have been working feverishly, getting input, meeting, being yelled at, talking to parents, talking to students, trying to come up with the portrait of a New York State graduate. Now, other states have it, right? New York is late to this game. However, what's different about what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to build a portrait that has some teeth, that will actually prepare our young people to be successful in the 21st century and reflect what we would all want for our own children, right? So that it's a real portrait. It takes into account who's in front of us as students. Not the students that we wish we had, or the students that we had, but the students that are in front of us now. And then the idea becomes, once we have the portrait, and once we're committed to that portrait, then the next part is fairly easy. What do we have to do to get there? And that's the differential access that I had talked about earlier, that we have to figure this stuff out. That's why sessions like this, programs like this become so critical, because this is more than just getting certified. This is really, in my mind, This should really be about a laboratory experience for how do we make sure that all of our young people are the beneficiaries of a high-quality education. So on that, I'll take my seat and
Here, here. Interesting. So a number of things resonated with me, as I would imagine they did with many of you. And probably what resonated most was how refreshing it was to hear you say some of the things that you said. Because when we are out in the field working, and I don't want to say how many years I spent in the field, but I spent a lot of years in the field. And you never know, do the people that are sort of running the system, are they seeing and experiencing things the way we are? Or are they completely disconnected? And what I heard tonight is, at least so far, they're not disconnected. Right? There's a recognition of what works and what doesn't work. There's a recognition of what we need to do to support young people. So you're not here to hear me. So I want to be clear about this. This is an information gathering session. Right? So one of the things that Dr. Young wanted to be clear about was they don't necessarily have all the answers. All right? Certainly around implementation. Although some of the questions tonight are going to be about implementation of the things that were read by the panelists. And why do we ask those questions? One, it informs Dr. Young and his staff around what it is that the field is thinking about, so that whether or not they can address that tonight or whether they'll go back to the commission and bring that back to the commission. The other thing is, these are questions, and it will help if there are responses and answers to some of these sort of day-to-day questions. It may help limit the rumors that they don't know what they're doing, they don't know how they're going to train teachers. Yes, they do. They absolutely do. Now, intended versus implemented is the other challenge. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. So what we did was they each have a set of questions. They're going to ask one question. There'll be some dialogue back and forth around that question. Then we'll move to the next one. If we answer all the questions and time allows, then we'll go back to the beginning. And like I said, we'll have questions that we can answer at the end if you submit them to us. So without further conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Lenny Bruno, who's going to ask the first question. Okay. Lenny?
This is good. This is on. Thank you, Dr. Young, for being here. First question, you did share a bit about this, but could you share a little bit about the research or data, that led to the decision to move away from this current system?
Sure. Unlike other initiatives where first you start and then you look at the research, I use the word brilliant, but I think one of the brilliant moves that the committee engaged in is that each of the forums, and you should know this started in 2019. So we began this process in 2019, before COVID, by the way. So each session began with not only a review of literature, but a review of literature that looked at certain research questions. And so when the participants came to the meeting, they came based on, well, what do we know about the current reality? And the reason why we did that was because we continue to believe that systems of education have to be able to respond to the current reality, right? That when you build a system of education, it should be able to respond to whatever the current reality is of the time. And you really can't do that without looking at, well, what are those experiences? And so we took great pains to look at the body of research that related to things like assessments, for instance. We looked at the body of research that supports the idea of work-based learning. We looked at the body of research that examined the whole value of using or building high schools around Carnegie units. Right? Some of you that are in high schools, you know what I'm talking about. Seat time. You know, how much sense does that make? We live in the age of technology. When seat time was developed, it was developed at a very different time for a different population. In fact, it was developed at a time when we were in an agrarian economy. We're nowhere in that. Right now, any young person, any 10-year-old can go on the computer right now and look at the whole math curriculum from kindergarten through grade 12. They can see it. And so yet, and by the way, there are some young people who actually can sit in front of the screen and work their way through it. Yet, we don't give them any recognition for that in school. So how much sense does that make? So this idea of seat time, of the structure, the organizational structure, landscape of schooling, there was a body of research that addressed that. Most of what I'm saying, if you're interested in the specific citations, I would ask you to go on our website because it's there. And I think that's an important question because we're not often asked that question. You know, well, what are these ideas based on? That's why I started out with those 10 things, because they weren't just figments in Lester's head. You know, the 10 things that I outlined for you, you know, people have written scores of dissertations on those topics. So we know what the current reality is. The question becomes, how do we use that knowledge base to improve what we're doing?
And the interesting point around seat time, and for those of you who don't know, I still have a daughter in high school. And she says, if I know the material, why do I have to sit there?
That's right.
And she's right.
That's right. That's right.
I've already done the work. I can pass the test tomorrow.
Right.
Are there other things that are important about being in school? Of course, social emotional development. But as Dr. Young pointed out earlier, there are many avenues necessary for development in students. So it is really refreshing to hear that perspective. I'm not surprised to hear it because I know the folks have been working on this. So now we're going to get a question, I think, that's driven by the fact that there are thousands of multilingual, bilingual, and English language learners in our system, right? And how will this affect them? So I'm going to turn this over to Demis Carabello, who's got some questions about that. Demis?
Thank you, Dr. Young. You mentioned that high-stakes assessment as the only means of success have the power to undermine our most in-need students, and I really appreciated that, especially in light of the fact that our Ls often do not graduate because they cannot pass some of those Regents assessments. So will there be in this, in the new graduation measures, will there be a culminating assessment that then becomes maybe like a gatekeeper to our students being able to graduate and reach their, the potential to get a diploma?
The honest answer to your question, there are two parts. The first part is we only have recommendations. The Board of Regents has not acted on any of the recommendations. I will say this, speaking as the Chancellor, given what you just said, and I actually agree with you, it would be disingenuous for us to say that we're transforming education if we didn't take into account what you just talked about. All across New York State, there are young people who, I've met them. They've passed 4 Regents. And because they arrived in this country, maybe they've been here a year. I didn't come to do political statements. But, this is a land of immigrants, right? I actually think, you know, I believe that a good part of your cultural wealth is your language, is the language you come with. There are some who were brought to this country and they were not allowed to speak their language. You know, there are some who are here who wonder what might their language have sounded like. And I keep saying, for those young people who speak languages other than English, they are already ahead, because we're trying to prepare young people to participate in the world. And so for us, the real question becomes, how do we accommodate a wider range of diverse behaviors in our public school systems? That's really the question that we will be answering. And I would, you know, I'm not going to use the word hope. I don't see how we could pass the recommendations without addressing this issue. Now, there's one thing that I left out, and this also I thought was ingenious on the part of the committee. They have something called Thought Exchange. And Thought Exchange is on our website, on our graduation measures website. And the Thought Exchange allows you to go on the website, I think it's still up, and you can put your ideas on the website, and it gets posted for everyone to see, and then people react to it. And so what we're serious about these recommendations. So if you have recommendations on this topic, it would be helpful for either you go on Thought Exchange or you might want to communicate them. Amalia Schiff is here as the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Commissioner.
The grad, so you can email gradmeasures@nysa.gov.
Thank you.
So, you know, I find really interesting this conversation around language. So we spend years teaching native English speakers to speak another language. Yet we have children who speak other languages in some places, not all places, spend years trying to squeeze it out of them. It actually is, to me, counterintuitive. So it's refreshing to hear, and I think that the Miss who works very directly with this population, it is critically important, one, for the cultural recognition, but also success in schools. So I certainly had a lot to do with that when I didn't know much about it, but I was learning from Judy Chin when I worked in Chinatown. That was a big part of the work that we did there. So now we're going to shift a little bit because you mentioned earlier, the people that are closest to the problem understand the problem, may even have some of the solutions. So now we're going to ask some questions, I think, about teachers, how we would work with them. So I'm going to turn it over to Carmen, who's got a question around teacher development.
Good evening, Dr. Young. So with this significant change in curriculum design, what will professional development for teachers involve?
That's also an important consideration and an important question. So, and I want to answer it, but I have to do it in this context. One of the challenges for the New York State Board of Regents is that there is this law in New York State that says that curriculum is the purview of the local school district. And curriculum and professional development go together, right? I mean, they do. So what do I mean by that? When it's done well, the professional development is always based on the curriculum. So in our business, you always begin with the what. And it's interesting to me. I've gone to schools where there isn't a coherent curriculum, and I keep saying to myself, and people will tell me, oh, they go into professional. I said, well, on what? And I'm not trying to make light of this, but this is very important, what you raise, because again, it suggests that maybe it's time that we as part of the transformation, we begin to relook at some of the laws and regulations in New York State. So why am I saying that? There are places around the state, there's 733 school districts. There are some places that do a wonderful job, absolutely phenomenal job in professional development. There are places where they have coherent, well-articulated curriculum in every subject area, right? Everyone knows exactly what they're responsible for. Everyone, students, parents, everyone. But then, remember what I said earlier, then there are those other places. The problem with those other places is that those other places have been those other places for the last 20 or 30 years. And so as a member of the Board of Regents, see, the question I ask myself is, why do we allow that to happen, right? And so the professional development should be driven by the what. That's what should happen. And it's our hope that we would build the capacity, both physical and financial resource capacity, so that every district can engage, can be part of. You know, major corporations say that 2% of the budget should be devoted to development. You know, the education budget in New York State, we have a vice president, a NYS here. I think the education budget is around somewhere close to 39 billion, maybe, give or take. Billion with a B. Those of you who work in New York City, the budget for New York City is about 38 billion. So when you think about that, then you say, well, how much of that budget is actually going to professional development? So that's why it's important that we have these sessions, because I think these are the kinds of conversations we have to have if we're serious about this. You know, if we're serious about this idea of differential access, what does that mean for the teacher in the classroom, right? It's easy for me to sit here and spout this stuff. The question is, do the teachers in the classroom, have they been prepared to do that? And that's going to take time, it's going to take resources, and it's also going to take something that we have to really rethink. And this is, you know, this is in my head, rethink the school day. You know, one of the questions I continue to ask myself, and by the way, the research says that the more time you spend actively engaged in learning, the better you do. Yet, we've not extended the time for learning in all the years I've been in education. And so if we're really serious about making sure that every young person is learning, and then when are we going to look at that structure, the structure of time? And I think these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have in school if we're really serious about reaching all students. The other thing I would say is this. There are many of you right here, right now, who know you have these Saturday programs. You do, I know you do. You have after school programs. You have before school programs. You have all of these things because instinctively, somewhere in your brain, you're saying they need more time, right? They need more time. But here's what the research says about more time. It doesn't say more disjointed time, more disconnected time, right? It says more engaged time with the same people, right? The same teachers, right? There has to be some connection between during the day an extended day, during the week, an extended week. So there has to be an opportunity built in with the professional development. There have to be opportunities for us to kind of talk about these things if we're serious about reaching all students, right? And I understand contractual issues and all of that, but I think if you start out with this idea that we want to reach all students, and remember what I said earlier, you have to remove the barriers, right? You know, that is a goal. You have to remove the barriers, and it is challenging, but that's why you all are aspiring leaders. You know, we didn't talk about the three traits that leaders need, but I'll just say it. Courage, integrity, right, and innovation, right? Those are the three things. Courage, integrity, and innovation. I won't take time now, but afterwards, if you want to know how I define it, I'm happy to tell you.
So, what? The what? What do we want students to know, be able to do, and truly understand, and then how will we know? That's exactly what Dr. Young is talking about. And maybe as important, in a lot of ways, it's the same for our teachers. And how will they implement that? And time. So we need more time for students, but I will tell you this, and for those of you that have heard me speak about this, the United States, teachers spend 90% of their school day teaching. That's great. Students need that contact. That means they only have 10% of their time to engage in their own learning. If that, because they're answering phone calls, they're doing the practical things. Every other major developed country in the world that is successful with their students is spending about 60% of the time teaching. That doesn't mean you decrease the amount of time students have with teachers. It means that you're working with that somewhat differently so teachers have an opportunity to engage in learning. And I'm going to say one more thing, Dr. Young, to build on, I don't want to take away. So this idea, when I used to be an adjunct, and I would talk to the students, and they would say, I don't know why they do it that way. Why does the principal do it that way? Why do they do it that way? Now, they don't all do it that way, but some of them do, right? And so what Dr. Young says, right, they need courage. They need integrity. They need to have that intuition to know how to be innovative. Not all of them, I'm just going to say it, care. They come to work to get a job. They see leadership as power, and they make those decisions without having a conversation with you. What's the answer to that? You. You're the answer to that. That's why you're in the programs. That's what we try to impart upon you when we're teaching in our programs, and that's what we try to do for you when we're engaging you in learning activities. Servant leadership. How do you serve your teachers? How do you serve your students? How do you serve your communities? So that's part of what it is. So there's that connection. I'm trying to make the connection now between what it is that you've been learning and doing with us, and then actually linking it directly with what Dr. Young is talking about.
May I just add one other item that I think that as leaders we haven't done well. We have not been able to communicate to the general public. See, there is this idea that teachers are only working when they're standing in front of children. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand, those of you who've ever taught, you know what I'm talking about. You go home and you spend hours trying to think through, planning. And when you think about the amount of time that you invest, I mean, think about this. And you see, this idea that teachers are not working, you know, you hear people say it all the time. You know, you get off at 3 o'clock. You off on the holidays. You off on the summer. But they don't really understand what it's like. And I think part of the problem is we have not done an adequate job communicating what is it that teachers are actually doing. What's the value? And I think if more people understood the value of it, we would have greater investments. But sidebar.
All right, so we're going to shift to a slightly different part of the conversation. So Jashawn Roebuck has a question.
Good evening. Are there any specific measures designed to support transfer schools and schools in urban areas during this transition to the new graduation requirements?
I'm not trying to be confrontational, although I do believe in confronting the issues. So the first problem with transfer schools, and I'm going to make a distinction. Outside of New York City, they're referred to as alternative schools. That's number one. Number two, New York City is the only place that has over 50 transfer schools. And so part of the problem in New York City is that you have too many, right? And so you have over 50 schools that are supposed to be providing alternative instruction to young people who have differing needs. And because you have so many schools, you're unable to really provide the students that attend those schools with the alternative strategies that they need. So the first thing that I think needs to happen, particularly in New York City, is that we have to reevaluate the number of this alleged idea of transfer schools. Second thing is, because let's be honest, you know, there are some young people who need an alternative. You all know who they are. However, because you need an alternative doesn't mean you can't meet standards. And the question that we should be asking ourselves is, if you're in this alternative environment, what are the kinds of opportunities a young person needs so that they can be successful? And you can't do that if you have as many schools as we have in New York City. It's just not feasible. So, and by the way, if you go outside of New York City, most high school, most districts, they may have one or two. And here's the other thing, the data shows that these young people are graduating and they're doing well. And they're in Long Island, they're in Rockland, they're in Orange, they're in the North Country, they're all over. It's only when they come to New York City that we have this problem. And the problem is associated with the magnitude of it all, right? We've just pushed out too many young people, and we've placed them in settings, and we haven't made sure that they had what they needed. I'm sorry, but
That's
I
okay.
want to be honest.
So, if anybody can help support that, Angelique Johnson-Dingle, who was at Western Suffolk BOCES, I know she was responsible for alternative schools there, that did an amazing job. So supporting that and shifting that into a better, I think a deeper conversation would be relevant.
Well, there also is a report that you should read, Good Shepherd Services, Sister Paulette Lamonaco was the executive director, and she issued a report which talks about what alternative education should be. And I actually think it's a model. I think she has put together, I don't know if any of you know about Good Shepherd Services in New York. However, she's done this, and again, I think the research on this topic is pretty clear. I think the problem, and I don't want to get into why do we have 50 schools, but I think the challenge for us is when we're trying to educate kids and you're trying to build a system, everyone that may need something different doesn't mean they have to go to a different school. You know, there may be some of us in this room that when you were in school, you were a little different, right? You understand, right? I will speak for myself. I was very different. And you know, I wasn't always understood. And it was tough. And so I will tell you that sometimes I'm still not understood. But
So this, the idea of access, opportunity, and equity is certainly part of the conversation, and Trayvon has a question in that regard.
Hey, good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Please submit, if you have any questions on your index cards, staff are coming around now, if you could submit them, so we could start to review them real quick, and then we'll make some determinations about getting those questions answered for you. But Trayvon?
Yeah, good evening. Can you share how this shift promotes greater equity for all students and identify existing equities these students are intended to address?
so I didn't mention this. This Board of Regents, one of the first policies we passed was the diversity, equity, inclusion policy. So New York State, in 2021, passed its first diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And one of the key principles that the commissioner, Dr. Rosa, has identified as it relates to the graduation measures is the whole area of equity. And essentially, I'll say a couple things about it. You know, we talk about this often. Equity is more about fairness than anything else. And one of the things you have to understand about fairness doesn't always mean equal, right? And so in order to do the fair thing, sometimes you have to treat situations different. And you have to be willing to stand on that and do that. And it's interesting that a lot of the communications that we're receiving from Washington is attempting to move us away from that. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the real intent here? And I just spent a lot of time talking about differential access, meeting kids where they are and addressing their unique needs, and all of the things that we now hold on to that apply to equity. Yet we're being told some other things. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the intent of what we're being told? Now these are conversations that policymakers have. What I would say to people in schools is just what I said when I started. Your job in school really is to remove the barriers and build the kind of program that you would want for your own personal children. That's essentially what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to figure out how do we create the space so that you can have the kinds of opportunities you need so that every young person can be successful at the next level. Not that we're prescribing, but we're saying, well, what is the next level? You know, what is that next level? And then what do they need to be successful? Right? And what does the research say about what they need? And then how do we do that? And the only way you can do it is you have to have an equitable approach.
Thank you. I'm going to back to Lenny. We've started collecting some questions from the field, so we're going to do our best to get through some of them. So Lenny's got one here.
Dr. Young, how does the pilot plan address the needs of students with disabilities?
Did someone say thank you? Yeah. The answer, that, again, there are recommendations. You know, I can recall during some of the sessions that we had with parents and students, those were some of the most telling and revealing sessions that we had, because we had parents with students that had IEPs who were telling us heart-wrenching stories about how, you know, what happens to their child when they graduate and they don't have a high school diploma, particularly when their child's done everything that they've been asked to do. You know, they've done everything, and then we don't give them a high school diploma. What opportunities do they have? And so when you ask about students with disabilities, one of the reasons why I named as the transformational idea moving to one diploma was just for that reason. It is with an idea of, for young people who have IEPs, that there should be one high school diploma. They should be eligible to receive a New York State endorsed high school diploma. And, you know, it's my hope that when the board votes on the 12 recommendations, we will decide to have one high school diploma for all students. I think that's the first step. The next step, I mean, it's kind of like a two-pronged thing that we have to do. We have to make sure that if a young person has an IEP, that they're actually receiving the supports that they need so that the special education assignment and/or placement doesn't become like a terminal condition. And I mean that. You know, what we know is that for many young people, they go into these classes, and the classes by design supposed to be a temporary intervention. And for many of our young people, they go in and they never come out. And so there are two things that we have to do. We have to figure out, how do we ensure that all children have access to what they need so that they're not disproportionately placed? And then once a youngster is placed and they have access to something called special education, that what they receive is truly special. So there are two parts to that, and it's my hope that when we get to the point of making the final decisions, that will be included. The other thing I would add is that we're spending a lot of time not only looking at the K-12 world, but what happens to young people with IEPs after the K-12. So what we found out, for instance, is that we have young people with IEPs that have been accepted to college, for instance, and they can't go because the college won't make the accommodations. And so we're working on how do we impact that as well. So there's a lot here, but may I just make a recommendation? If you have some ideas, please, you have the email, what is it, gradmeasures@nysed.gov. Please get that to us ASAP.
The other thing you can do is submit the questions or comments to us, and we'll get them over to SED as well. So make no mistake, one way or another, we're going to make sure that they get there. So what we've done, we've gathered some questions. There's no way we can ask them all, because I do want to leave some time for Dr. Young to sort of have an opportunity to just engage with you in the room. All right. So, but I do. Each individual has another question. These are a little different than some of the questions that have been asked, but they're here. They're in the room. They live in the room. So rather than say, well, those weren't what we developed as a panel, we want to give Dr. Young an opportunity. And if nothing else, even if he doesn't necessarily have a response, then it is informative to his thinking that this is a question in the field. And I know when I was superintendent, I did it all the time. What's the question? Maybe I don't have an answer. But I'm glad I know that there's a question in the field, so we can give that some consideration. So I'm going to go back to Demis, who has another question that came from the audience.
Dr. Young, how are students and teachers in high-need areas being involved in the conversation about the upcoming shifts? How are their voices being heard and elevated?
There are two ways, and I'll just talk about some of the things I've been doing. The last month and a half, I've been having a series of meetings with young people, primarily high school students, in some cases college freshmen, around New York City. I guess this qualifies for high-need areas. I mean, you know, central Brooklyn, the South Bronx, central Harlem. You know, as best as the schedule will allow, we're having these conversations. In fact, I was in a school last week in Crown Heights, talking to high school students about the graduation measures. And it was just very, very interesting. I was saying to the Vice Chancellor on the way here that the youngsters said, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, but if it takes you 5 years, I won't get the benefit of it. And it's interesting because, you know, some people think that our students are disengaged, right? They're not interested. They're very interested. They want to be successful in school. They want to do well. You know, they want to enjoy the fruits of what, you know, this country has to offer. And they understand the connection to an education. Yet, what they were saying is that this is great, but you're taking too much time. And so this is something that we have to deal with. But I just want to assure you that we are having discussions across the state, and we are listening to the voices of young people. And I've committed myself to make sure that we're listening to voices of young people that heretofore or perhaps haven't had those opportunities.
The voices of those that we're working with are critically important. Great question. Thank you. Jashawn?
What is your and the Blue Ribbons Commission opinion of statewide AI adoption and also financial literacy curriculum to ensure economic opportunities and access to innovation for all people? And that's from Brett.
So I'll start with the last one first, which is probably easier. Of course, we believe that, and by the way, this has been a recommendation from across the state. Everyone tells us we need to do financial literacy for a variety of reasons. And so we've heard you. And I would hope, and I'm sure, you know, I don't want to put anyone on the spot because they have an opportunity to relax, so I don't want to do that to them. However, they are going to be working on that. I mean, you can expect to see opportunities in the area of financial literacy. I mean, the question will ultimately be at what level, you know, where do we start? But certainly we will be doing that. You'll see an expansion on the civic engagement, I think, and climate education, and as well as the seal of biliteracy. So I don't know how many of you know about the seal of biliteracy, but we're thinking about it in terms of adding seals in climate, in, you know, finance. You know, this issue of financial literacy, though, is very important. I didn't realize how important, but every high school I go to now, it's amazing. And when I talk to young people about their future, the number of young people who tell me they want to be entrepreneurs. And that just goes to show you how much time has changed, right? Because I'm like, what did you say? They said, I want to be an entrepreneur, and both males and females. And so the young people are thinking very differently about the world and about finances and about making money. And I think we have to make sure in school that they're armed with the knowledge, skills, and disposition so they're able to do that in a meaningful way. Because, you know, what's the Tupac, don't believe the hype? See, a lot of young people have been told that you can just do that. You know, they think because Jay-Z did it, they can do it. No, and this we have to be we have to be cognizant of. And so, I think it's wonderful they want to be entrepreneurs, but I also think they have to understand what that means, right? And they have to understand these are the rules of the road, this is what it means, this is how to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to have two more questions, and then I'll let Dr. Young close, and then we'll obviously allow for a time in the room for people to have a conversation or ask questions. So Carmen, you have another question?
Yes. What cohort of students will be the first to experience this new system?
Well, there is I just before I say this, I want to just check, Amalia, there is a chart that I have in front of me. I don't know if that chart is on our website.
Yes, it is.
It is on our website. So New York Inspires, you will see a calendar which spells out what cohorts will be impacted during the next 5 years. So you actually see what the plan is. But just remember what I said. None of this has been voted on yet. So it's important that you look at it, and if you have recommendations that are different than what you see, it would be helpful if we heard from you. Because once we do make the decision, when is this coming to the board?
Well, the first part will be coming, well, there's one piece that's coming to you next week with the major life extenuating circumstance exemption. However, the portrait of a graduate will come to the board sometime this summer.
Right, okay.
And the major life extenuating circumstance provides the local school district superintendent the ability to provide an exemption from a graduation requirement assessment, so that's Regents exams in addition to alternatively approved assessments, where a child has experienced a major life extenuating circumstance. Coming to the department 3 years ago, there was nothing more gut-wrenching for me to hear from a parent that the other parent had passed away, and a child was upset, a child is in chemo, gets very ill, can't sit for the exam, and our only response was essentially that they could sit for the next administration. As a mother of 3, that just never felt right to us. So the Blue Ribbon Commission recommended that we provide an avenue for school superintendents to allow for that student to be exempt for that administration. And we are looking to bring that to the board to vote on, actually on Monday.
Here, and I will tell you, that broke my heart every time that came up as when I was superintendent. And I know some people will say, well, people are going to abuse that. No, they're not. No, they're not. And by the way, we don't organize for the outliers. Is somebody going to get through the crack? Maybe. But the greater good allows for us to support students like that. And I'm not surprised that came from you, Angelique. Thank you so much. All right, so I think we have Trayvon has another question, and then we're going to, I have a question, and then we'll break from there.
Yes, if Regents are no longer required for graduation, what is their purpose, and how does the exam support the needs of students? I think you mentioned earlier.
So if Regents exams are no longer required to graduate, what's the purpose of the exams, was the question from the floor.
The Regents examinations fill purposes above and beyond just the graduation requirement. Right now, we're using them as kind of like an exit exam, and they are tied to graduation. However, the Regents exams are really an assessment of how well students have mastered the content that they've been presented. The challenge for us is, yes, they are supposed to measure their mastery of the content, which I think is an important measure. I said earlier, results matter. The problem is they shouldn't be the only measure. So that's number one. Number two, I think we've got to take a very close look at the Regents exam. And this is a question I hadn't been asked, but I'll make it as a statement. I was asked this a few nights ago. Why are the Regents exams scored differently than other examinations? In other words, what does a 65 mean? Right? Does it mean you got 65% of the test correct? No. So once you start to say that, you start to ask yourself, well, maybe that's that. Maybe there's something wrong with that. So I think ultimately we have a lot to look at the exams. But what I wouldn't say, and I don't think anyone could say, is that the exam has no value. The exam does have value. It just doesn't have value on the things that we have established and allowed to have happen for all these years. Things have changed. And the evidence bears that out, by the way. The number of children that have to take remediation when they pass the region should tell us all something.
So, Dr. Young, this came up a number of times in the room on some of the cards that came in. We have folks here that would like to get involved, whether it's with the planned pilot or the graduation requirements. Are there ways for them to get involved in policy-making conversations at the state level, as teachers, as administrators? Are there avenues where they can access and become involved beyond putting things as questions or suggestions?
Okay. At this particular moment, as Chancellor has shared, doing these type of feedback sessions do help to inform our work. And as we continue to develop things, we do share them out with folks to get some feedback, to make sure that what we're putting forward before it gets to the Board of Regents for an approval. So we can, if you would like to take the names and contact information for folks who are interested in providing some additional insight to us, maybe serving on another type of advisory committee as we move forward, we would be happy to keep that on file, and as something is developed, we'll share it with you, we'll meet with you, and we'll take your feedback.
That's great. So from a logistical perspective, what will happen after tonight is make sure you sign in, make sure that your email is on there, and then everybody who attended will get an email from us asking, first of all, you're going to get your CTLE credits and all those kinds of things that you need. But it'll also say if you're interested in being involved and want to be added to this list, we'll add you to this list, and then I will share it with Angelique, and as things come up, you'll be invited to attend. So before we break, Dr. Young, do you have any closing comments, anything else you'd like to say?
Sure, yes, just this, and maybe I should have said this earlier. Here's the other thing. You are in perhaps one of the noblest professions that exists, right? You are, and you're not often told that. But I would say to you, because, I have actually, you said I was in this for 50 plus years, and that's kind of interesting. Every time I hear that, I kind of shake a bit, but here's what I would say to you. I've had the good pleasure of being part of a profession that has actually given me more than I've given it. And quite honestly, I can never say thank you enough for that. Whenever I've had the experience of running into former students who are now superintendents with PhDs, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm saying to you is that there probably is no other profession where that can happen. And when I say that, see, here's what I also know. That only means something to people who know. And so what I'm hopeful of, and what I didn't mention, is that what we're talking about is not just the assessments in K-12, we're also looking at, well, how do we prepare teachers at the higher ed level? You know, what is the path? One of the things that's going to happen next week at the Regents meeting on Monday, we have a presentation on the various approaches that are being implemented across the state around preparing and encouraging young people to be teachers. So one of the things I would ask each of you to think about doing is think about talking to the young people that you influence about the possibility of pursuing education as a career. We desperately need educators, right? We need people who really care and who really want to make a difference. I would say this, and I've held all kinds of positions, but the truth is, I never really aspired to be a leader. I just wanted to make a difference. And what I realized along the way is that in order to make a difference, I had to move into a leadership role. But the key was I wanted to make a difference. There are young people in your schools and classrooms who want to make a difference, but they've never thought about teaching. So I would hope that some of you are motivated enough to, when you go back, to just talk to your young people about the value add of helping another person do well in life. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Young. Amazing. What a great learning experience. I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. From another logistical component, for those of you that had questions that came forward that we didn't get a chance to get to, we will combine them, put them together, and I'll send them over to Angelique. We will publish them.